Oh my gosh, this is a big one. I'm going to tell you, I am no longer a terrorist, and I'm going to point out to you all the other guys who are bad.
Right.
But really, what the guy is doing is positioning himself to be the big dog
Yep.
in the neighborhood. And he's
Right.
still a terrorist. Like, he hasn't changed anything. But he's all making nice with the CIA so he can off his competition.
This is Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch, produced by the Mob Museum. Giovanni, Rocco, and Dutch McAlpin are former police and federal task force operatives. They infiltrated drug cartels, outlaw motorcycle groups, and the mafia. Now, they share their stories, along with others who have gone inside the life.
Welcome back to Inside the Life at the Mob Museum. I'm here with Dutch. I'm Giovanni. In this episode, we welcome Michele Rigby Assad, who is a badass herself.
This interview is really fascinating. It's not very often you get to speak to someone who is operational in the CIA.
She talks about her younger life, a trip to Egypt as a teenager, having no background in any of the culture or anything, meets her husband Joe, travels back overseas, becomes a CIA operator and intelligence officer, and then does 5 tours overseas post 9/11.
Her badassery is intellectual. It's in her mind, and it's the way she carries herself and the way that she uses her information to fight crime and fight terrorism.
Michele authored 2 books, Breaking Cover, which is a bestsellers list, and Getting Off the X, which was recently released. We hope you enjoyed this episode on Inside the Life with Michele Rigby Assad. Hey, Michele, thanks for being with us. So we just want to kind of jump in before we share too much of your career before you got into the CIA, because I don't think you're born and raised into it, right? None of your family, you were the first of your kind. So
Yes,
I know
absolutely.
I know a little bit of your background, but can you share with us where you, like, not specifically grew up, but where'd you grow up, your demographic, and what drew you to the CIA?
Yeah, so I grew up in a really small town in Central Florida, surrounded by cows and orange trees. My parents were very solidly middle class, didn't know anything about the world or government or foreign affairs. But right after I graduated high school, I went on a mission trip to Egypt. And that was really life-changing because I came from Central Florida. This was back in 1991 when you couldn't get on the internet and learn about the world. And here I am in like Upper Egypt with a group of students working in an orphanage for a month. And that just kind of kicked off this desire to learn more about the Middle East. So I followed that up by doing a semester abroad in Cairo as an undergrad. And then we did a mission trip to Russia and Ukraine right after the fall of the Soviet Union, which was so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up getting a master's degree in contemporary Arab studies before that was a cool thing to do. And just a little bit after that, got hired into the CIA right on the heels of 9/11, right as 9/11 was occurring. Okay. And it wasn't a strategic decision on my part to get in the CIA. I didn't think I was CIA material, and I didn't really grasp that was a real job. But I applied to like 500 jobs, and that's the only one that came through.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Did you were you mission driven by it, or what? Did you go to job fairs? Like, that's the exact question I wanted to ask you. Like, why the CIA? How did that pop into your head, or even become a consideration? Because it's not like they go to job fairs and try to recruit, the best
I got
of the
one
best.
thing I don't want you to skip over, and I think it's kind of important because a lot of times you talk about how a person grows up. When you were traveling as a young lady in Egypt, never been anywhere, how was it to be treated as a Western woman? And did that help shape you, maybe your decision to move into the CIA direction, even though there's, like you said, I didn't even know this job existed, but could you kind of talk about what that experience was like for you?
I love that question, Dutch, because it was such an interesting experience to be a female in Egypt when I was 18 years old. I was really struck by how hard it was, how much I was hit on, and there was so much in a part of the world where men and women, their interactions are very strictly governed. There is this incredible sexual tension. And as a woman, I was constantly rubbed up against, pinched, touched. That whole semester I was there, I felt like I was just this sexual object walking down the street all the time. And I really had to learn how to kind of like walk with a purpose and my husband, who was just my boyfriend at that time, well, he led this mission trip. He was, explaining to me what was happening, like what was going on in terms of the ideology about a Western woman is loose and they have no morals, therefore we can do anything we want to you. And I was like, what the heck is that? And so I think the experience of running headfirst into a culture that's so opposite from your own is just like, what? I wanted to understand that. I wanted to get the roots of that. And then also, meanwhile, my boyfriend, future husband, Joseph, who was a Christian, I had learned all about the persecution that he, his family, and his community was enduring, living under the roof of a Muslim majority state, and all the terrible ideology that came out from Upper Egypt that were the roots of Al-Qaeda. So a lot of people don't realize that the roots of Al-Qaeda come from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which sprouted from Joseph, my husband's village of all places.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. And so I was thrust into this world that was like, my head was spinning. And so that's definitely what got me so interested in learning more about the Arab world.
Right. And you didn't have a lot of familiarity with the culture before you met Joe, or that was all new to you? He was teaching you as you went. You learned from Joe, because his story in itself is an amazing story, how he came here and his schooling. I wish we had enough time to touch on it, but he was a pretty strong influence. Did you have language skills when you went to Egypt? Did you have any of those skills?
I had zero of anything.
So you were just kind of relying on Joe and your relationship with your boyfriend at the time, that he would translate, keep you safe. Okay. And
absolutely.
And that was the spark that drove you towards the CIA. Would you say that?
Well, I didn't know that at the time. I had no clue where that was going to take me. And in fact, I didn't even know it was going to take me into any career at all. But now looking back, it's just very clear that lit the fire that, step by step then brought me towards the CIA.
Do you think it was dangerous for you at that time there?
Was it dangerous at that time? It was, in fact.
Yeah. I mean, because I know where we're going to go with
I'm glad
this.
they didn't know this. But during that period of time when I was a student in Egypt, there was a lot of internal terrorism of the Muslim Brotherhood and Egyptian Islamic Jihad battling government. So like everywhere we went, when I was a student, we had to get searched. Our bags had to get searched everywhere we went. I wasn't even permitted to get on the train and go to Upper Egypt because the train was getting shot at in Upper Egypt. People were getting killed on those trains. So the Egyptian government wouldn't let Westerners get on those trains. And as a student, Joseph and I, during that semester, we got engaged and they smuggled me onto a train to go to the orphanage that his parents ran so we could have a party one weekend and come back to Cairo. And the Egyptian government, I arrived, they smuggled me onto this train. It was like a big operation. The next morning, the government showed up at the orphanage and said, you have an American here in the orphanage. You smuggled her onto a train. What's going on? And so again, you're learning about how an authoritarian regime works, how you can't do anything without them knowing what's going on. It was such a fascinating experience.
Oh, I could imagine. But here your mom and dad sitting at home thinking you're just on a vacation and a trip you're not in any danger, right? So at what point did you come clean with
mission.
them? Right. Yeah. At what point did you come clean with them? When you got back, did you tell them how the trip was, or?
Yeah, I did. I don't remember a lot of that, but even when my parents hear me talk now, they're like, gosh, we don't remember you telling us that, or we didn't realize things were as bad as you're telling us now.
So the events of 9/11, that's after those events happen on that day. And then you go to a job fair of some sort. And were you recruited? Were you approached about the CIA? Or is this something that you just was on the list and you just checked it?
Yeah. So basically, while I was at Georgetown in 1999 is when you started applying to jobs, because I graduated in 2000. So you're already applying for jobs. The CIA was I went to a job fair where the CIA recruiter spoke about what it's like to live undercover and serve in the CIA. And I thought, well, I am certainly not CIA material, but I definitely need a job. Right. So I threw my resume into that pile. And I went through a very long vetting process by the government and was really surprised that they were so interested in me. And remember, this is pre 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And then they hired me to be an analyst. Long story short, right before I started that analyst job, the CIA withdrew that job for me, telling me I was no longer meeting the requirements of the position. And it's a very strange, weird story. But in any case, my husband ended up learning about the other side of the CIA, the operational side, and he started applying to that pre 9/11. And then when he was going through the interview process, they're like, wait a minute, you have a wife and she has similar qualifications. Give us her resume too. So then I got yanked into the other side of getting into the operational side of the CIA, which was definitely where I was meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the rejection into the analyst position was so like shocking and so hard, it was good because it got me where I needed to go eventually, which was the operational side. So basically, Joseph was like a class ahead of me, and he was in the middle of surveillance training in Crystal City on September 11th, just a mile from the Pentagon when that plane hit.
Really?
And I was about to start training with the next class of trainees in January. And so talk about a moment in time where it felt like everything aligned. So here is a young man kicked out of university in Egypt for being a Christian. He's native level Arabic. He knows about the ideology of terrorism. And then this little girl from Central Florida who knew nothing about the world, but then just really tried to learn, getting into the CIA on the heels of 9/11. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow is right. Because you kind of knew you were going to be thrusted right into it, right? After 9/11, you saw those events. And you knew
100%.
the two of you were a double-edged sword, right? That you were going to get deployed together no matter where it was. Did you kind of know you both were on your way to the Middle East by then?
Yes.
Yeah. There was no other place.
So the agency was very desperate for anyone who understood the Middle East. So for us, it was very easy. We knew that we were going to be sent to the Arab world. And also for the agency, you get a 2-for-1. So financially, it's good for them, but also you're filling 2 slots in locations that most people don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kicked off 5 tours in 10 years in very difficult places. And it worked out really well for us as a couple.
You applied to the CIA, the analyst position had gone away, and your husband had applied for an operations position, and we kind of skipped right past, like, could you talk a little bit about, no one knows what the CIA really does, or I've known very few people even worked there. Can you talk a little bit about that vetting process? Is it common for them? Is it a good thing to bring a couple on together? I would imagine it is. And also maybe, what kind of training do you get? Do you learn languages and shooting techniques? A little bit about what prepares you for your first assignment.
Oh yeah. So such a great question. In order to get vetted, to gain employment at the CIA, you have to go through so much. So you have to go through really detailed background investigations. You can't be taking drugs. You can't be, an alcoholic, all those basic things. You have to get polygraphed. You have to pass the polygraph, which is awful. I hate it. You have so many interviews and really, really long interviews, because if you're sitting with someone for 3 hours, it's really hard to hide who you really are. So the CIA really tries to get a feel for your personality in these extensive interviews. There's cognitive testing, there's physical testing, there's analytical testing. I mean, I remember a couple of you would go for an entire day and you would spend all day being tested. Personality tests, psych tests. By the time they get done with you, it's like they know everything about you. And you finally get in the door, and that's just the beginning, because now you have tradecraft training. So now you have to learn everything about how to break the laws of another country, to meet operationally with your source and get intelligence from them. So you have to learn the ABCs of operations. So how do you recruit a source? How do you handle that source? How do you identify red flags and counterintelligence concerns? What are people's motivations for working with you? There's soup to nuts on what you have to understand in order to carry out safe operations. And anytime through that whole year of tradecraft training, if you can't handle stress, if you break easily, if you are flustered easily, if you can't think on your feet, you're just culled from the program. And so you keep doing things that you don't know if you know how to do them, but you're like, hey, you know what? Give it a try. You have to learn how to conduct surveillance. You have to learn to know if you are under surveillance by someone else. So you have these really long, what we call them surveillance detection routes that you drive or you walk in order to figure out if somebody's tailing you. You have to learn, high performance driving, which is really fun. I'm an aggressive driver, so that I was really good at that. You have to get qualified on a weapon, not because we're law enforcement. We don't, carry guns normally, but we were being sent to a lot of war zones and dangerous places. So they knew they had to give us really basic instruction on how to use a Glock or an M4. And you couldn't go to the war zone unless you were qualified on those weapons. So yeah, there was a lot to learn.
It's interesting because to me, kind of based on that short description you gave, it's more about your intellectual mind and your abilities to use your mouth to navigate and work through it. It's minimal gun training, minimal hand-to-hand fighting, stuff like that. It's more about using your intelligence.
100%. People think from the movies that we're very tactical and there's always violence involved. And I'm like, oh boy, if you ever get to that point, you're already done.
Right.
Everything for us is it's a mind game, right? Yeah. It is psychology. Like, why would people turn on their country to report to the CIA? Or why would a terrorist turn on the members of his terror group to report to the CIA? Like, that's really what's so fascinating about the work, is it is all about your head.
Well, it's the level of emotional intelligence you have to have, right? And how you deal with stressful situations. Because dealing with situations here when you're on U.S. soil is one thing, especially when you're dealing with cooperating witnesses or sources. It's easy to meet them, but having done it in other countries, and you're on, like you said, you hit it right on the head when you said other governments, their rules are not the same as our government. So if you get caught, or if that person is counter surveilling you, and they work for the government that you're trying to get information on, it's this whole human chess game. That's the part I used to love the most, right? Because you said it's not about the physical altercations you're going to come across. It's the mental component of it is just, and I always describe it as playing chess with other human beings, like positioning yourself and positioning others. But again, you how did you, so you would deploy and try to flip the sources, right? When you were there?
Yeah.
Or did you have contacts before you left and you were to meet up with them? Were you developing them on your own?
All the above. And they don't let us talk a lot about how we do that. They don't let us talk about cover. So those are like the red lines.
Yeah.
But let's just say, you have to get creative about how you're going to get to the people you need to turn to try to create them to, try to make a source out of people. And it's like, how am I going to talk to this man who thinks I'm the enemy? How am I going to turn him? And so it's a real mental challenge to say, how can I present what I'm trying to do? Because we never extort or blackmail someone to work with us. We never do that. Like they have to, on their own accord, agree to be our source. So how do you get them there?
Well, it's a long road or a short road, right? It depends on how desperate they are. Some people want passage out. Some people, it's just, they're just trying to save themselves, the individual or their families sometimes. So that's their motivation sometimes, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, so the whole motivation aspect of things is just so fascinating because so a lot of them needed money. Money is a big driver of why anyone would work with the CIA, especially in a war zone, when the economy is crumbling and there's, normal jobs have gone away. Another thing would be saving themselves, like you said. So they think that by working with the CIA, it provides them a level of protection, which in some sense it does, but in other senses it's still a war zone.
Right.
And we're not God, that we can always protect a person. The other thing, oh my gosh, this is a big one. I'm going to tell you, I am no longer a terrorist, and I'm going to point out to you all the other guys who are bad.
Right.
But really what the guy is doing is positioning himself to be the big dog in the neighborhood. He's still a terrorist. Like, he hasn't changed anything. But he's all making nice with the CIA so he can off his competition.
were you and your husband working together? Were you guys a team? Were you working separately on different? I'm sure you both were trying to identify different sources and all those things, but did you guys, I guess, were you assigned with the same objectives?
It depended on the place, the overall assignment. So there were places where, like, Joseph would be developing a source, but being his wife and being an intel officer as well, I'm helping with the development. So we're meeting together, I'm making dinner, we're inviting them over. So in that sense, it's kind of like a tag team, we're doing it together.
Right.
And then in other locations, um, we there were so many times, and it was like really my first uh, experience debriefing and handling terrorists was Joseph's sources,
Mm.
actually. And so he would be handling them. I would come in for a special project and I would try to get information out of him that he was withholding. So in that sense, we were working together, but you never want that terror source to know you're married.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's kind of what I was curious about is so you talked earlier about when you were young and you were in Egypt and how you were manhandled and mistreated and just constantly under sexual attack basically. So now you're an adult woman, you're in a professional government position and I'm assuming somewhere in the Middle East. Like, did that impact how you were able to do your job? Did it lend you more or less credibility? You know what I'm saying? Like, can you kind of talk about what you've learned there?
Oh boy. So yeah, it's so interesting because, again, when you're dealing with people who have an ideology that says men and women who are not related to each other should not be in the same room together, and especially if she's uncovered. So meeting with me is like the most illicit thing they could possibly do. And that dynamic is very much a part of their interaction with me as a female. Everything was about flirting. Everything was about my chance to be with an uncovered woman, like, so exciting. So for me, it was always like, how do I get them over this gulf in their head? So they think I couldn't possibly be intelligent. I couldn't know anything about the Middle East and, this crazy place of a war zone. I shouldn't even leave the house. Like, I should just be at home bearing children and taking care of them. So how do I get them to deal with me as a professional intelligence officer? I had to figure out how to make that work. Like the psychology of that flip, I had to figure that out while in the field, like on the fly.
Yeah, that's stuff they can't exactly teach you probably in your training. Did you find women were receptive to you, or were they so suppressed that they really wouldn't deal with, because in our operations, sometimes, women who were kind of in the background and not treated as important, actually, they were a vault of knowledge. You know what I'm saying? Like they knew everything going on.
I never dealt with women.
Really?
Ever. Yeah, it was all men.
Really? Is that
Yeah.
by choice or just
A lot of the military did like that tactical on the ground. They would have special women as part of their units who could go in
Right.
with a translator and speak to the women. But ours was very strategic level intelligence, and at that level, it was all men.
and that level of cooperation, when you were talking about like a guy that comes to you with intelligence or wants to cooperate and come on board with Team USA, we found that a lot in organized crime across the board, right? I mean, what you described, positioning themselves. So just for the people that are watching the show and listening, it's almost like the organized crime structure we have here with the 5 families, I would assume, right? You have different hubs, different cultures, different cells, if you want to call them, right? And this guy is trying to eliminate his competition to position himself, both, I would imagine, with the Westerners, right? And on his own territory. Because it's common knowledge that they're all communicating with the Westerners. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, so this is interesting dynamic. So Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, who was a dictator for, 3 decades, he set up all of these competing intelligence organizations to keep himself in power. And so what they did was they reported on each other. They reported on the population, they reported on each other. Even like men and women were expected to report against their husbands and wives. So when you've got an entire culture that you've set up to not trust each other, where you can never tell people what you think, what you get from that is a lying culture.
Right.
I will tell you what I think you want to hear. I will withhold my true feelings. I will say yes when I mean no. And so what you ended up finding out is like everyone lied to us all the time. So you have to become really good at figuring out, how to bust through those lies. And so also in that culture, based on that foundation, not only were the Sunnis and Shia destroying each other, we have the sectarian war raging, but if you don't know much about it, you don't understand that Al-Qaeda and Ansar al-Sunnah and Ansar al-Islam and all these other insurgent groups, they were fighting each other.
Right.
And then the Shia groups were also fighting each other for power and resources and government control. So you have this giant sectarian war, and then you break it down, and there are these mini wars going on. Like, there was no escape from conflict in Iraq. Everybody was against everybody else all the time.
Yeah.
And so you kind of had to figure out, like, how to flip that and make it work for you. At one point, Joseph was so clever. We were trying to take advantage of the rifts that we were seeing in the relationships between Al-Qaeda and these other Sunni terrorist groups. And so the way that Joseph went about this was so fascinating. He ended up cutting through the nonsense, going through the top leader of this top terror group that was kind of in competition with Al-Qaeda. And he said, you guys are fighting us. You're being destroyed by the Shia.
Mm-hmm.
And you're fighting us.
Right.
We're not your problem. Al-Qaeda's your problem. The Shia are your problem. So knock it off. And the guy was like, this is very senior, well-respected leader who was like, huh, you're so right. Like, it's so obvious, but Joseph merely had to point out the obvious. And he's like, if you will stop attacking us, we will leave Iraq. We want to leave Iraq.
Right.
And he was like, okay, so that is it. You have to find those points, those areas. You have to be really clever about finding that thing that's going to resonate with that person.
Mm-hmm. Common ground. Right.
Mm-hmm.
All the while living in a hotbed of just lies, right? Untruths and just lies and treachery all around you. What was the source of income for these terror groups? I mean, like, we're sitting in a museum, we're in this exhibit for organized crime today, and we have animals that have been smuggled in, or rare exotic pets, or knockoff materials coming in. Is there anything traditional that these terror organizations or extremists did to raise money for themselves?
Yeah, so they were a lot like organized crime in Iraq. We would say that all the time. These guys are just organized criminals.
Yeah.
So they would, force people to give them money, force businesses to give them money and resources. They would steal things and sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And they've morphed through time. So when Al-Qaeda morphed into ISIS and then took over northern Iraq, if you guys remember back in 2015, they took over Mosul overnight, which was Iraq's second largest city. They emptied the banks.
Okay.
So their coffers just swelled.
Yeah.
In their effort to, create this Islamic State, which of course we had to fight against. So then they got really, that was really strategic level, taking the money out of the banks and
Right.
Yeah.
Were they physically taking cash out of the banks, or were they sophisticated enough to like do it digitally, or were they physically like robbing banks as taking cash?
And taking cash,
Gold, and jewels, whatever was in the bank.
But now we've got, morphing again, and we've got these terror groups that everybody says they're, thinks they're so different because they have different names. They're really the same thing. They're the same ideology. So now you've got Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who are getting funds from all over the world, for the Palestinian humanitarian cause.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've gotten really clever. And so
Right.
now money is coming in from all corners of the world in the name of helping the starving Palestinians. But really, as we all know, it's going to the bank accounts of the Hamas leadership in Qatar and elsewhere.
Okay.
So again, it's constantly morphing how these guys work and get their money.
Yeah. Making it look legitimate, just
Yeah.
just like traditional organized crime. Have a legitimate company, illegitimate company, and just try to make it look like, hey, listen, we're just trying to help the community, like every traditional OC guy has ever done.
Giovanni was talking earlier about the exhibit in my museum. It has all of these like different things that are shipped to the United States from around the globe. In the Middle East, did they have rackets outside of terrorism? You know what I mean? Were they like shipping goods to the U.S. that we consume and buy that are like other ways of income or other interests or drives other than terrorism?
We'll take Egypt for an example, the Muslim Brotherhood, which had to become very strategic because they were fighting the government and the government was fighting them back. They set up businesses, like they pulled back in terms of showing their ideology and fighting, but they established businesses that imported goods from Asia. So they produced and imported goods into Egypt, which has 100 million people. And so they got really good at setting up legitimate companies, and then they used these gains to achieve their strategic ideological initiatives. So yeah, it's interesting. They've gotten quite clever.
Yeah, so their motivation remains at the jihad level, their religious belief of terrorism, but they're smart enough and intellectual enough to find other ways. I mean, we're kind of misled to believe that they're just riding around on horses with AK-47s and they're barbaric and don't know what they're doing, but they have greater capabilities.
Oh yeah, and so if you look at Syria, the current head of Syria, Giuliani, used to be one of those guys, woo woo,
Yeah.
terrorist cowboys. Now he's all dressed in a refined manner because he got schooled by Turkey.
Right.
Turkey is led by a Muslim Brotherhood country that's like, you don't have to be like pistol whipping people on the video. You can put on a suit and tie, tell everyone you're reformed, rebrand yourself, and then be clever about how you do what you're going to do. You got to set up a whole new country. You've got to establish your control over Syria. So make people think you're not a threat.
Wow.
So now you've got a whole, terrorist rebranding going on in Syria.
Right.
Well, sure, we saw that operational wise. I saw that when we were here on soil in the U.S. and we had operations, and you saw the extremists and the jihadis kind of move from wearing their traditional garb, which they would wear back home, to all of a sudden start wearing Abercrombie and Fitch. They're wearing Gap clothing. They're wearing nice sneakers. They all have phones. They become westernized, And I watched that transition in one of my cases where the two cells yelled at each other and argued. You're not true Al Qaeda. I am. Look at you. You're old. You're the old hat. You're the old gangster. Look at me. This is the way we're supposed to look now because they blend in easier, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're street smart.
And what about like cigarettes? Because here traditionally we make money with cigarettes in the street here doing organized crime cases. I know here in the States we use that a lot, but did they have that? Like cigarette sales, counterfeit goods coming in from China?
Oh, you know what they're huge on? Huge. Captagon.
Like an amphetamine of some kind?
One of the biggest producers of Captagon in the world was the Syrian regime that was just removed from power.
Really?
They had built their drug labs?
Flowed into Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the whole Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, Palestine, wherever. It flowed all over that place. And now it was so interesting, when the opposition took power, the rebranded terrorists, they actually took videos of these Captagon engineering places. But what's interesting? They didn't blow them up.
Really?
Uh-huh.
You
They
know
just
why?
dismantled them temporarily.
Yep.
They're just going to pick it right back up because
Of course.
that's like such a great revenue stream. So basically, terrorists are pushing drugs in order to, again, have this incredible. They made so much money off of this Captagon. The Saudi authorities were constantly doing interdictions and getting, so many like millions of Captagon pills. So it's a real problem in the Middle East. Like
Okay.
it's one of their biggest problems.
Wow. So it's traditional.
So it's like every country will do. I mean, we talk about the mafia at the Mob Museum a lot, and their drive at the end of the day, mostly greed, right?
Yeah.
They say we wouldn't do this and we wouldn't do that, but well, maybe we'll sell a few drugs, maybe we'll run a few prostitutes, maybe we'll do a few other conspiracies, and even in the Middle Eastern countries, they're willing to create different kinds of drugs for a profit.
Yeah, and of course we know that, the Taliban's been doing that for decades,
Right.
and that stuff makes its way to Europe and wherever. So yeah, that's a proven.
Michelle, if you could kind of describe what the difference between the elements of crimes with organized crime and terrorism, are they alike? Are they different? Like kind of how do they compare?
That's a good question. Quite honestly, the definition seems to keep changing,
Right.
but the way that we worked with the definition of terrorism or terrorist groups, it was a group that seeks to achieve its objectives through terrorist activities. But they've really expanded that definition quite a bit. We're calling everything terrorism. Any kind
Right.
of violence now we're calling terrorism, which I disagree with. But it has to have some ideological bent to it. that is motivating the murdering and all the other crimes that they carry out.
When I was still operational, we saw that transition. I'll rewind to my father-in-law, who was in law enforcement for so many years. He realized how traditional organized crime was a thing of the past and terrorism was going to be the new organized crime, right? And we've made that transition now. He was killed. He himself died in the buildings on 9/11. So we see firsthand that, the impact it had on our family. But since those days of 9/11, very much so. The operations I did later in my career, I was a money cleaner. So I was a guy from New York, a hooked up guy. Maybe I made it known that I was organized crime related, traditional Italian organized crime. But we would clean money for cells. We would clean money for terror groups. And they now accept it as a traditional terror group that hates Westerners. Oh yeah, the Italian guys, the mafia guys, yeah, they clean money, So they don't mind their terror money being cleaned through Western companies now. Terrorism has now infiltrated the organized crime realm and traditional organized crime. So the attacks aren't traditional 9/11 attacks that we see.
All of these groups and countries exploit our openness and democracy.
They do.
Yeah. We're
Right.
so open. We have people from so many backgrounds. It's easier than ever for China, Russia, ISIS, Al Qaeda to do what they want to do here and to blend right in.
Right.
And yeah, like you said, they're smart. They know how to make it happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a new wave of organized crime. And
I think I heard Michelle. I think you said something that we kind of skipped by it, like the differences or the likelinesses between terror and organized crime. They both look and sound like organized crime because they are. I think the difference, maybe you two will disagree, but hearing what I just said, political extremism, religious extremism versus greed. Organized crime, people want to make money. They'll do anything to make money. Perhaps on the terrorist side, it's a bit more spiritual. It's a bit more, they need money to do it, but it's got a extremism attached to it.
Yeah. In fact, people find this funny. I understand terrorism. Like, I understand the ideology. I get what drives people to do what they do. I don't get cartels. I don't get organized crime because it's like evilness without a reason, right? Just the greed.
Yeah. No,
That actually scares me more.
Did you see a difference between your tours? Like how much time went between your 5 tours when you would come back here on soil and you'd be home for a bit? What is that time frame like?
Every person's career is different. Ours was extremely unique. We just went from one to the next, almost.
You did?
With maybe a month in between
Okay.
tours where we could come home and see our families.
Tours back to the same area, or did you move locations?
New countries.
New countries. What kind of differences did you see trying to navigate the new locations?
So hard.
Yeah.
I don't think if you don't know the Middle East very well, you just don't know how different each country is and how even within a country, how different areas can be. Egypt is nothing like Saudi, which is nothing like Lebanon, which is nothing like Turkey. So every new tour, you've got to learn a whole new culture. You've got to learn a whole new issue. Just because you're a terrorism expert in Saudi doesn't mean you know exactly what you're doing when you get to, another location.
Yeah, and I just want to point out it's hard for one operator, right, to do that yourself, to acclimate to a new surrounding, to familiarize yourself with the new culture that you're going into. But you and Joseph are moving together, right? You're operating together and working together. So if one's not up to speed as fast as the other one, I could see that being a conflict a little bit, right? Because you both have to adjust accordingly.
We just had to help each other learn.
Yeah.
And that was so.
Was
so
it nice?
great.
That's what I wanted to ask. Is it easier having him with you and you having been with him?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have done any of that on my own. I just don't know if I would have had the internal fortitude just as a female by myself.
Right.
Maybe other women do have that. I don't. So we were a great team. And then again, on a very human level, when you're moving every year, or if you're lucky 2 years, warzone tours are a year. A regular tour is 2 years. You have a new country, a new home, a new city, a new job, a new boss, new colleagues. There is nothing that's not new.
Right.
So fundamentally, in order to be a CIA intelligence officer, you have to be a very flexible person. You have to be very willing to drop everything and move on a moment's notice. So we spent our first tour 2 years in a really dangerous place, which is now considered a war zone. Should have been. It was like right on the edge of that when we were there. We got, a month of leave. Then we started a new tour in a nice place. After 5 months, we started hearing rumors that we were going to get surged to Iraq for a year. And we're like, we've just been here for 5 months.
Really?
And then, like 5 months later, we packed up, went back to DC, got more weapons training, and then got surged to Baghdad, just like that.
Right.
I can't even imagine trying to reinvent yourself after 5 months in a terrorist country or a war zone like that. I don't know how you can do it.
Fast. Yeah, you're right. You have to learn quickly. You have to pick up on things really quickly. Um, you have to have the real sense of adventure. Like it's super stressful, but in the back of your mind, you'd be like, oh, this is so interesting. We're going to learn a whole new country. And that has to be the driver, because otherwise it's too hard.
Right.
But if you realize, like, life is about learning and serving, then you have that flexibility to turn on a dime if you have to.
Was all your work covert work, or was some of it overt, out in the open, where they knew your identities, they knew you were government officials?
Probably can't answer that.
Okay.
However, this is a bit of a flip that surprises people, because in so many of these tours, we were undercover, but because we were serving in such crazy, dangerous places, everyone who looked like me was assumed to be CIA.
Right.
So it's almost the opposite. Like, you're walking around with an X, a target on your back or your chest, like the whole time you're there. So it's like, oh, well, maybe we're supposed to be undercover, but everyone's for CIA. So now how do you do your job?
Yeah.
You already know you're in danger. You already know that you stand out. Like, even though you're covert and you're trying to remain covert, you stand out. And you're in a war zone, and you need to be very vigilant all the time, right? And you already said most of the time you guys aren't even armed. You're not wearing bulletproof. You're not driving bulletproof vehicles, I'm assuming. So I don't know if it's something you came up with. I'm familiar with the term "get off the X," and you've kind of taken that on. And can you kind of talk about what it's like to live with that mindset of being prepared to get off the X and what that is?
Yeah. So the CIA realized they were sending all of these Westerners to crazy places, so they needed to give us counter ambush training. And so we got this training every time we were going to a war zone or a really dangerous location. So the concept is same used in the military and law enforcement. That's why you guys know it. You can't freeze in that moment of fear, uncertainty, when an operation is being carried out against you, whether by terrorists or criminals or cartels. If you're being attacked, you're on the X. And so you have to be trained out of the freeze response in order to force yourself to move off the X, because that's your best chance of staying alive. You've got to literally get off the X. So we were actually put through this training where they mimicked a real life terror attack in a car. So that we would be in a car, there'd be filled with students, we're all geared up. We'd go down a road, then suddenly they would kill the engine of the car. An attack would occur. They looked like Al Qaeda, they had the headbands on and they had flashbang grenades. The idea is to mimic what it would feel and sound like. So you've got rounds hitting the car, and you have to train yourself out of that freeze response. And so after taking this training, so many times, I realized, man, this is really useful, because this is like a metaphor for life.
Definitely.
So it's not just about how to stay alive. It's actually about how to get out of your comfort zone. Like, push yourself forward.
And I think it's so great that you're doing that, Michele, because for so many decades of us having careers, the three of us operating covertly and operating overtly, it doesn't matter how you're operating. We've been in those positions, to be in a gunfight, to have the rounds flying, to be in an emotionally charged event. That's what we used to keep to ourselves, right? And I personally, I'll speak for myself, I never wanted my family to experience the things that I never wanted to let them into that world, but we live in a different world now, where this whole mindset of get off the X, that's just not our world anymore as operatives and law enforcement and military mindset. It has to be across the board, because the events that unfold here in this country today, and again, the active shooters and the things that happen terror-wise, that whole mindset that you're promoting is that don't vapor lock, don't freeze, don't lay there. How many times out of a tour were you in a threatened position? Were you ever put in that position yourself?
Yeah, so that first tour where there was a lot of carjacking and kidnapping, I used that once in a very famous. It's in Breaking Cover. Everyone loves the story.
Mm-hmm.
I used Get Off the X to survive possibly what would have been a kidnapping, and Joseph and I had to use it. We were being chased through the streets of that city another time. So yeah, so a couple times, and then of course in Baghdad we were getting shelled like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were not in a hardened facility, you had to run to a bunker. So we got really good at getting off the X and into a bunker in Baghdad. That was well practiced.
Right.
So yeah, we unfortunately quite good, quite the experts at getting off the X.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be hard to recover from. Did you find yourself when you came back every time there's a loud noise, like you and Joseph dive into a barricaded there someplace?
When the rockets or the whatever comes back into the atmosphere.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
The space shuttles. Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
I remember we came back from Baghdad and we were in a mall, when people used to go to malls, and there was a sonic boom and we hit the ground.
Yeah.
But we were like fresh out of Baghdad.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I think those loud noises, and again, it's that hyper vigilance, hypersensitive, that anything, a pop, a siren could set you off. Like we talked about one of the guests recently, just talking about PTSD and trauma. Just the smell of wet concrete for some guys that were in 9/11 and the bombings or, different events. So it's not an easy thing to clean yourself off and come back home and go back to living a normal life with Joseph, I would imagine.
I always feel bad about saying that because I wasn't, a member of the military that was literally in the road zone, risking their lives every single day, getting shot at. You guys got shot at. Most of the time, no, I wasn't getting shot at. It was just, rockets.
Just rockets.
So I almost
just
feel
rockets,
guilty
rockets.
saying that.
Just
Because
rockets.
I don't know. We were pretty protected in the green zone. So, but it was very real. And I have such empathy for anybody who was on the mean streets, doing what you guys did, doing what others did for us. And I am just so grateful for that.
You said something that was interesting to me when we were talking about getting off the X, because getting off the X isn't a new mindset, whether it started with the CIA or you or whoever. To me, before you said what you said, getting off the X meant like in a shootout, you're literally turning your hips and very, very violently running off of that area before you re-engage your target or reassess what you're going to do. The first thing is to get out of that zone. But you said, I think it's something to be used in every life. And you talk about working covert like we did in things. It literally is in a position of like, okay, I'm standing here, I'm talking, I'm not in danger, but if I don't articulate myself and I don't sell this legend right, I'm standing on the X. I mean, like you said, it's not just tactical. It literally could be for all points of your life.
Yeah, so I basically compared it to like as humans, we get stuck all the time. It's just part of being a human. We get little stuck, we don't know how to get a project done. We get big stuck. Like, I don't know what to do with my career, or I just graduated college and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, or I just retired and I have no idea. The X can be so many things. Or think about circumstances, the loss of a loved one, a disease, getting fired from your job, like all these things you have no control over, a global pandemic that can throw you on this X of like, I don't know what to do next. And you guys and we know you cannot freeze there.
No, right.
Like, you can feel the pain of what you're going through, but in order to survive, you've got to move.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. And I think that the younger generation has been fed a diet of lies that if something is hard or it hurts, you should quit.
Right.
And we all know that in order to do anything meaningful in your life, you have to be willing to do hard things.
Right.
Sure.
You have to be willing to get off that X of your super comfort zone, or, meditating on your social media. That will get you nowhere.
Right. Yeah, it's you don't have to do something dynamic. It doesn't have to be impulsive where it's this explosive thing. Sometimes, like you said, it's just changing your mindset is enough to get off the X. Just changing and making that conscious decision to say, I'm not going to, like you used the perfect example, trying to find a job, or what you're going to do next in life, or losing a loved one. You can stuck in that moment. You can stay there for the longest time, or you can pivot, like you said, and muscle memory. It's you have to practice it, right? It doesn't just happen because you will it to happen. Not to sound like an old cranky man, but that is the problem with this generation, because they think I snap my fingers and somebody's going to fix this problem for me, right? I'm
Yeah,
going to
they
call
do.
somebody, and that
Yeah, and
mindset, you're
have what I want now, instant
instant
gratification.
gratification, right? And it's not, you'll get what you want, but you have to move to get it,
And you
whether
have
that's
to wait.
survival, whether that's, having that mindset to move forward and go after what your passion is. I think it's a great message that you're pushing out there.
Yeah, and it's like it's not going to happen quickly. I use my own career as an example. It was 10 years of war zones and dangerous places and difficult bosses and toxic environments.
Hmm.
And I wanted to quit a lot, but I didn't. And I hung in there. And then I say, like, after that 10 years, 10 years is not instant.
Right.
But at the end of that 10 years, I realized that we had this level of counterterrorism and counterintelligence expertise that was completely off the charts. Then we were able to use that expertise for the last 13 years in careers outside of the CIA. We're able to do things other people can't because we did the hard stuff.
Right.
So I'm trying to get the younger generation, to understand it will be hard for extended periods of time. That's the
Yes.
part, is I'm afraid people are just giving up too soon.
Right. Right. And the rewards that come with hard work, right? Determination, commitment. That's the reward, right? It will
Yes.
come if you keep that mindset.
Well, and you can, and like I think you said there, you can get stuck in a broken heart. You can get stuck in mourning. You can get stuck in a crappy relationship. And it's okay to mourn it. It's okay to be there momentarily, but eventually you got to get off and move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So you
And
leave the CIA after 10 years, and you just touched on, you guys took those skill sets and all those experiences that you learned. And can you talk about what you guys do now?
Yeah, so we have a boutique consulting firm. We basically solve difficult problems that Western firms have when they do business in the Middle East. So as you can imagine, it's a very opaque business environment, very opaque culture. And so a lot of foreign businesses get into trouble with the local governments in Saudi, Emirates, Bahrain, all these, Qatar. And we're usually brought in to liaise with government authorities and do that diplomacy and untangle some of that mess. So we're kind of a diplomacy experts, I should say.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we're brought in to do risk assessments for companies that are working in the Middle East but never traveled there, don't know what to expect, and don't know how to plan for difficulties. So so we've been doing that for 13 years, but I got to tell you, that was also getting off the X.
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah, it's a big risk to take because you don't have the protection of the government anymore. You're not deployed by the government, the resources. But I guess it's kind of putting you back into your days of being operational too. Negotiation skills, the communication, getting the deal done. The success of it doesn't have to be drug deals and arms deals all the time, right? It could be a legitimate deal, a business deal, like the success of seeing something through. So you're still getting that.
I'm curious about that. So when you were traveling as a CIA agent operationally in these foreign governments, these foreign countries, and you're basically, if you're caught, you already said we're taught how to break the rules and the society rules of that country and elicit information. So now you're there with your own company legitimately. Do you find traveling in those countries a little bit easier when you already know that I'm here on a legitimate gas and oil contract, or what it is that you're doing? Like, is it like kind of relieving to know you don't hide in a secret, or is it still just as dangerous and still just as anxious?
It depends on the location.
Okay.
So we have to be very strategic about where we travel and what we avoid. And so, yeah, boy, it's so nice to just travel with no cover.
Yes.
Here. um, let's just say that we deal with a lot of governments who know who we are, who appreciate our backgrounds, and that's what enables us to engage at that senior level and with that diplomatic. Yeah, if that makes any sense. Then there are other places like we cannot go, and we'll never be able to go. We can't go to Cuba. We can't go to Russia.
Right.
Be thrown directly into prison if we did. We
Yeah.
can't, obviously Iran. We're like on a list of people that worked against Iran. So
Yeah.
The pressure of traveling, and we just make it seem like, oh, it's no big deal. I traveled in a covert name. I traveled to another country. That is not easy. Let's just, we just say it as, oh yeah, so it's nice to be able to finally be in my true name and be able to travel and go on vacation. The pressure that's on us going through TSA here in the States, even if we're not operational, just to travel is stressful. I remember my first time when I handed my ID to a TSA, and it was one of my many IDs I had. It was like, you could see the lying in my eyes. I'd look so guilty. That's the pressure and the trauma that it brings upon you. And
yes,
especially
on the US
going,
end.
what's
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah, on the US end, people didn't know that.
That's just
People
getting
don't
out of the
know
country.
that.
Now let's
Yeah.
land in another country under a name that's a made up name. It's all fake. I'm going to get known. And I get secondaried. God forbid you get
Oh, God.
secondaried in another country. And if those who don't know, secondary is you get pulled over and then they don't quite believe who you are. Is your name really Michelle? They bring you into another room. They start going through your bags. And, the pressure of that is tremendous. And we just take it for granted. Yeah, no big deal. Just traveling. We're not
honestly,
even operational.
I have friends, colleagues, who their travel profile, like mine, was so alarming. But they were men. They were male friends of mine who kept being tagged on the U.S. end as being potential pedophiles because they were traveling.
They were
to certain
traveling.
places. They got pulled into secondary almost every time
Yeah.
because people thought they were up to that kind of.
Yeah.
You're not even boots on the ground yet. You're not even operational there. So, and then the stress of, and I'll bring it up to you because you did, the dignitaries on our side and their side. Like, yes, there's open communication. Oh yeah, we have operatives coming in tomorrow. Oh yeah, some CIA personnel coming. They're going to be living in this neighborhood or doing this. It's so, and even if our government officials trust the other person on the other side enough to tell them, there's always that seed of doubt in our brain that that person might not be loyal to us and they might out us,
Yeah,
And you're talking
yeah.
at a time when, you see the videos and we all saw it post 9/11. You're in an environment where they were decapitating people
Yes.
for just being suspected of being Westerners.
Oh yeah. Man, like and that first tour was so dangerous, that place. And Joseph and I said to each other, you can never get taken because you'll never come back.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to, I said, I'd rather die getting off the X trying. I'd rather be shot in the back running away than get taken because I am not going to have my neck sawed off and put on the internet for everyone to see. Like,
Yep.
and that's what was happening. So it was so dangerous. I think back now, I'm like, how did we do that for 2 years?
We were just talking the other night. We were sitting at the bar having a drink together and saying that very same thing. We were just comparing and going, how did we do that for so long? Like, how do we keep going how do we keep going into these scenarios where, I don't know if this is going to be the one. Like, I don't know if this is like, what's the feeling? Or having bad guys describe to you what the feeling is of killing somebody and then not knowing if they're going to do the same to you,
Oh God.
And while you're trying to have a conversation, while I'm just trying to have an open conversation, the stuff that goes on in the back of our skull, people don't understand the stress and the trauma, and especially operating in a third world country where it's just chaos.
Yeah, I mean, some CIA operatives probably last 10, 20, 30 years, maybe entire careers, and you said 10 was enough. Well, not everybody goes through the exact same thing. You literally described us being in war zone after war zone after war zone, back to back for 10 years with no decompression, no debriefing, no chance to breathe, constantly reinventing yourself. I would imagine you and your husband have probably earned the entire career in your 10 years.
Yeah, I meet people now and they go, wow, look at you guys have a pretty flexible life. And I'm like, do you know what it took to earn that?
Right.
To be on my own clock? Like,
Yeah.
you guys know.
Did you have a lot of sleep deprivation and a hard time getting essential things? It's amazing what you think you need and what you can actually live with.
Yeah, I remember in Baghdad for an entire year, I would finish work sometimes at midnight, and then I would sleep till about 7 or 8 in the morning, which probably sounds like enough sleep, but I'm a person that requires a ton of sleep. But your night is interrupted by shelling, so somebody's getting shelled all night long. You're maybe running to the bunker at 6 a.m. Car bomb goes off at 7 a.m., which rattles the paper thing you're living in, and you wake up and you think, I feel like I just fell asleep. I'm exhausted.
Hmm.
How am I going to get through another day to midnight? I'm so tired. It was like a whole year of feeling totally strung out.
And just so everybody listening or watching, is shelling is the whether it's an IED, whether it's a SAM, a shoulder to air missile, whether it's just a rocket or a grenade being thrown, the shelling is just constant. So I would imagine at some point, did your sleep pattern become that of a New Yorker, where it's like it's just another car alarm going off?
Yeah, yes, yes, it did. I mean, especially that shelling in a faraway place, so you could hear it. But it was really hard to like not totally awaken with the car bombs.
Yeah.
They're just so violent, and then you think to yourself like, how many dozens of people just died?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so the aspect of that, the emotional aspect of thinking like, how many poor innocent, usually Iraqis, just died.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a tough way to live. I mean, sleep deprivation will kill you faster than starvation, and to live in that level of anxiety during the day in a war zone. And then you're telling me that you're literally getting an hour, maybe 2 hours of sleep consistently a night over an 8 or 9 hour period. I don't know how your body or your mental health can survive that for 10 years. The two of you are definitely impressive.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and towards the end, then your marriage starts suffering, and
Yeah.
then like you don't know your family, they don't know you, like you haven't been in touch with people. It's just you just know, like when it's time to get out.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you on a whole different topic. Like, what are some questions you get now that people find out you're CIA or ex-CIA and operative? Any myths? Like, what myths do you bust, or what are the biggest questions you get? Challenges?
Well, the first thing is that they think we're you guys. They think we're law enforcement.
Right.
That's probably the biggest misconception.
Mm-hmm.
And then they think that we, force people to work for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like we twist their arms, we blackmail them, and I'm like, actually, it's not like that at all. I mean, the CIA operates within a very constrained set of authorities, and everything we do is scrubbed by lawyers every day, all the time. So I guess people think we're kind of just out there doing stuff.
Right.
Everything we do has been vetted and approved.
Yeah. I love the fact that, to me, the CIA was always more cerebral, and being operational. That's the part I love that part about the operation. Like I said, that playing human chess, positioning yourself a certain way. That's the intelligence side of it, and gathering the intel, gleaning that intelligence, and then what you do with that intelligence. I know we can't really talk about it here on the show because I don't want to give up tradecraft, but developing that intel that you had, live intel, right? Usable intel, and to take that and give it to the forces that needed it out in the field. I mean, there can't be any more better feeling and success than that, right? When you see the raw material you gathered and how many troops you saved from dispatching that information where it needed to go, right?
That fundamentally was what made the exhaustion every day worth it.
Yeah.
Like the high you get when you know that you found the location of the car bomb and they were able to disassemble it before it was, they were going to use it in a day or two, or you prevented the troops from rolling over the IED, or you found the safe house where they were torturing Iraqi victims and they were building more IEDs. Like, that's amazing.
Sure it is.
And then the other intellectual part was like deconstructing a potential double agent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I figure out if this guy's lying to us? What can I do to figure this out? I love that.
And then what I'm curious, because you're covering so many things, and it comes up. How are you reporting this? I know you probably can't go into like physically, literally, but I mean, as a matter of fact, you are collecting intelligence. You've got to vet it out, make sure it's truthful and honest, and then you've got to get it to the people that need it. Like, you're not going to go destroy the bomb making lab or attack the terror cell, but somehow in a foreign government with no cooperation, you got to communicate it to who needs it. How difficult was that?
Not difficult, because we set up really good mechanisms to get this information where it needed to be really fast. So like when we were in war zones, we had a way, there was like a center to do this, where we had the operational commanders for different areas. So I would run up the stairs, hair on fire. I got this piece of intel and we got to get it to this area right now. And then pick up the phone, call the commander, tell him, stop the troops. You guys are about to roll over an IED. Like it was like that.
That's impacting for sure.
Yeah, or if we were working with a foreign government, we had mechanisms to pass them very quickly if we needed to. life-saving information about, the location of the terrorist or the plans and intentions of the terror group to carry out an attack. And that built relationships with those governments, which has been very important for the US and those governments.
As an operative, did you communicate with other triple lettered agencies or other government agencies? Like, I know we've experienced things that, sometimes in the intel world, we tend to hold on to our intel, see what other people have and not share it, but did you find in the Middle East, and especially these critical times like after 9/11 and stuff, was there a good sharing and exchange of information, and you guys cooperate well together?
Yeah, so that was very personality dependent. My actual job, that was a big part of it because I was called a collection management officer, and I love that part of my job. I loved working with my FBI, US Mill, defense attaché, DEA reps. I was one of those that enjoyed those interactions, and I was like, hey, did you see this intel? Hey, did you guys see that? And this might be of interest to you guys, or you've got to do something about this. So I had a very vibrant relationship with my counterparts, and I love that. Now, I replaced a woman that hated that and wouldn't work with anyone, and they thought the CIA was terrible because of it. So, yeah.
It's individually based and really personalities and
Yeah, very much.
The sensitive material that you dealt with in the CIA, Michele, was that of a lot of times you hear, well, I can't tell you about that because it's very sensitive. I can't tell you that creates a lot of conspiracy theorists, right? And it feeds that beast of conspiracy theorists. But when in reality, you really can't share the secrets that you have, or you can't share the intel that's coming in. Do you keep most of it to yourselves, or do you share that information? What is considered sensitive?
Yeah, so for the agency, just to be really clear, the agencies doesn't want to talk about where we're located. We can't talk, we can say, like I said, I served in Baghdad. I can't tell you the other locations because the CIA doesn't want to confirm where we have a presence.
Right.
So the other thing the CIA does not want to do is talk about cover. That is super sensitive. We can't say what kind of cover we're using. And sometimes that particular kind of cover can be used in formulating an approach to a target. So it's hard for me to say like how we got to certain targets because it would involve discussing cover. Right. So much of what the CIA does is considered top secret because if you let that information out, you could jeopardize certain people and ongoing operations. And so those are the things that you really have to protect, because if you tell the world how you're carrying out an op, then
Right.
you're opening up yourself to the enemy being able to stop you from doing that in the future. So you have to be very careful. I hate when, I've seen so many people use that excuse because here we are. They're posers,
Yes.
or they work for the CIA in a different kind
Thank
of
you.
position.
Right.
Yes. Thank you.
yes.
And they don't want you to know that they were really an analyst.
Right.
Analysts are amazing. Why
Yep.
are we pretending that's not
Right.
amazing? Like, be who you are.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
they want to like cover that over and pretend like they did the jobs that we did in the field. So they're like, oh, I can't talk about that. But really, they just don't know it.
Right. They all want to make
didn't do it.
themselves out to be 007. I'd love to tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
I
Are
hear
the-
that a lot, and I know these people are posers.
Right,
I
but-
see them on the press. I see them. They're everywhere.
Are the terrorists and the different rackets that you were investigating and collecting intel on, are they also building covert platforms themselves, different identities? Are they able to travel along globally under false identities or with covers or whatever we want to describe it as? Like, are they also doing things that you would think they wouldn't be able to do?
I would say some are. It depends on the country they're working for. Here's another flip on that. A lot of the individuals who are flooding into Europe and the West, say from places like Syria, were suddenly losing their documents. You guys remember that? All these military-aged males showing up on a border. Oh, oops. I have no documents.
Right.
Okay, y'all, in the Arab world, you don't go anywhere without your ID and your identity documents.
Okay.
You don't have them when you show up somewhere. It's because you made sure they got lost. So you can show up and be anyone. And the UN goes, sure, no problem. And now the US goes, sure, come in through the southern border. We don't know who you are. That's fine.
Right.
So it's different. Like, I don't know. I kind of answered your question and kind of
No,
not.
yeah,
Like,
you
there's-
kind of did. I think it makes sense. I just wonder if they had those capabilities. And you pointed out a thing. In the U.S., we don't know what it's like to travel to work on Monday with a passport and our documentation. But in other countries, that's a daily activity for them, right? They could be stopped at any time, and you better tell me who you are, or I'm locking you up.
You better have your papers.
Right.
You can't move through military checkpoints unless you got those papers. Yep.
And that's not just the Middle East. There's eastern parts of Europe and stuff the same way. You know, former
Yep.
Yugoslavia, to cross from one border to another, you better have your documentation.
Yes. Exactly.
And I guess the other thing I wanted to touch on is to debunk the myths of the conspiracy theorists, right? You're not out there running and gunning all over the world as a CIA operative or an intel officer, just doing what you want. I mean, I think it's important for people to know, and not giving up tradecraft. Again, everything that is done in the field is documented on a daily basis. There's people are held accountable. There's a chain of events. It's all documented in reports, and it's given to, people aren't just out there as rogue agents doing whatever they want. Every day you do work, and every time you do a mission or you go out, you have to do a report and hand it in. So
many reports.
yes. And people think like, well, you're just out there killing people, torturing people, gleaning information. It's not like that, right? It's so regimented, just like the work we did, and that's just like any other agency. You have to do your reports. You have to check into your supervisor, and there is the word accountability. You're not just out there running around killing people all over the world. So
Correct.
that's probably one of the biggest things, because that's the myth. We don't know what they're doing. Yes, you do. It's all documented. Every I, every T is crossed, and it's documented heavily multiple times. So
yes, it is. It's not so sexy to think about us intelligence officers or law enforcement officers, how much time you spend writing up all those reports.
Right.
Because in the CIA, we say, if you don't write it down, it never happened.
Never happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Here at the Mob Museum, we focus on organized crime and the history of organized crime. And the CIA used the mob to go after Castro in the 60s. Do you think that goes on now?
The way that it works, essentially, when you think about, okay, you're trying to target senior terrorist leaders and groups. So who knows those people? Who's closest to them? They're people of the same character and background and positioning.
Right.
So do you need to work with whoever is close? However, so that requires that we often work with people who are currently or were formerly terrorists. So when you think about it like that, it's very logical that we need bad guys who we can turn to work against the other bad guys, because they're the ones who have the access, and we need the access.
So it mirrors what traditional organized crime did. Our efforts and our government's efforts to flip an OC guy, an organized crime figure, is for the better of looking to infiltrate another or take down another group.
Exactly.
So it's pretty open. It's open common knowledge that that's the goal, right? That's the goal of the.
All the bad guys know it too. Yeah, everyone knows that. Because again, if they even get a whiff that maybe someone else is working for the CIA, they kill that person immediately.
Yeah.
Like, that's why it's so dangerous.
To make room for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I have no special knowledge about what we did in the 60s, so I'm not speaking because I've seen any secret reports. I don't know anything about that. But I know that this is how we operate. This guy is less of a bad guy than that bad guy, so we'll use him to get it. Yeah, of course. That's how we operate. Yeah,
and I think the comparison is there. How the mafia worked with the government is the same as what these different terror cells are doing with the government. They're the mafia over there. They're the mafia bosses. Whoever's in charge. And you described it perfectly by saying, look, the one terror mob boss, he steps up, and if he's the first one to the table, the other bosses are trying to knock him out, so they're going to clip him and take him out so they could be the ones to come to the table and work with the CIA. So it's there very much like they did in Cuba with Castro.
Is there anything you want to talk about your book? You want to talk about your guys' businesses, or things that you want to get out, things that we don't even know what to ask you that you want to get out?
Well, so I'm not usually very good at marketing, but I just think this book that I put out, it dropped January 14th, Get Off the X, CIA Secrets for Conquering Obstacles and Achieving Your Life's Mission. If you know someone who is stuck in their life, this is the book. So not only do I share, I'm a storyteller, so it's all stories of how people got unstuck, including myself and my husband. but also it gives people the methodology to do it.
Yeah.
So you want to get unstuck, but how do you actually make that happen? And so I just think it's really important, man, especially if you've got kids and you're trying to teach them how to be counterculture and how to be willing to do hard things and how to be willing to march through uncertainty. Like this is a message, whether through my book or otherwise, that we've just got to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does have a strong message of that, Michelle. You did such a great job with that book and just the messaging for young guys, girls out there, and just, for the next generation to just keep on pushing forward. I think it's a great book, and I would highly recommend it. And it's is it on audio yet? I know you're doing the audio, right?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
You're doing it yourself?
It is my voice on the book.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then and speaking gigs, you're doing the presentations, you're working with private companies, corporations, right? You're still doing that together?
I do. I take these great, cool, weird stories from the CIA and I twist them for a corporate audience. So I do a lot of banking, finance, big companies.
Great.
And it's so fun to take those lessons that I've learned and provide some wisdom to others. Yeah.
Awesome. And how do they find you? You have a website?
Yeah. So it's my 3-part name, MicheleRigbyAssad.com. All the info is there. But if you can't remember that, if you just plug in Michelle and CIA, you'll probably find it.
Pop right up, right? All right, cool.
Spent your whole life trying not to be identified. Now you just put in Michelle CIA and up there you are.
It's so deeply uncomfortable.
It is. We know.
Yeah.
We know.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's so hard.
You and Joe are both patriots, and you have my ultimate respect. And I know I can speak for Dutch saying that. We get that all the time, patriots and being called, but you both have just sacrificed so much. And just that story of stopping that IED, I almost get like chills thinking it and saying it, but how many moms and dads have their kids back because of the work that you and Joe did? And the unfortunate ones that lost their lives, but those parents that lost their kids and lost their troops and the troops that we lost, we were able to have that revenge on those persons that took their lives because of the work that you and Joe did, in the aftermath. So it can't be enough thanks being sent to you and Joe for the sacrifices you both made while maintaining a relationship and a common bond together since you've been kids. And, I can't thank you enough for that. Yeah, I can't thank you enough.
Very nice.
It's hard to make a relationship work. You two make it through 10 years of war torn. I feel like you should be like 107 years old, like 10 years of a CIA career like that. Like you got a lot of value.
And I've been around, I've seen you both and they look happy like they just met and they just got engaged, but you're not the common operators, that's for sure. So I would imagine it's the things that you survive together that is your bond too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
A domestic squabble in the Middle East in a war-torn country is probably not quite the same. He's probably like, you better listen to me.
Yeah, we do everything together. So there's moments. So
Yeah, of course.
Right? I would imagine I should have left you in Tehran moment.
And that was her.
That's for sure.
Joseph, you figure out how to get there.
I know I should have left you in Tehran. You don't have to admit that. The laughter says it all.
Michelle, thank you for being on Inside the Life, giving us a perspective inside your guys' life at the CIA and operating in defense of our country against terrorists and covert positions without weapons or bulletproof gear, kind of enlightening us on some of the CIA's roles globally.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
For behind-the-scenes photos, merchandise, and exclusive content, visit InsideTheLife.org. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcasts.